see here. Okay. Are we ready to start? Welcome to the third meeting of the Tree Advisory Board Ad Hoc Committee. I'm Melissa Jackson, your chair, and thank you everyone for joining us today. One of the first things we need to do is some introductions and welcome. Firstly, we have a new member to bring on with us today. And I believe Jean Ehlers, is that did I pronounce that correctly?
Well, Jean Ehlers.
Oh, I'll try again. Thank you. Jean Ehlers. Very nice to meet you. One of the things we did in some of our previous meetings, Jean, is we talked about a little bit about who we were and why we're on the council and kind of introduced ourselves. Would you be willing to do that?
Sure. First of all, I'm so glad that I'm finally able to play catch up here so that I can be on board with what is going on. It's interesting, exciting, and really, I was impatiently waiting, but life just kept carrying on. Mm-hmm. Well, I've lived in Lakewood in the same neighborhood since 1979, and I am a mother and wife. I have 4 children still living at home, and I would just like to mention to our 2 Lakewood Youth Council people how wonderful it is that you're participating. I heard that on the meetings that I had a chance to review, and so congratulations to you, Hank. But I have a pair of 17-year-old sons, and they participated very briefly with Youth Council as well. Of course, it was on Monday nights, and of course, that's where I've spent the rest of my time in Lakewood dealing with Boy Scouts. I saw, well, I'm going to say for about the past 17 years, we have 2 Eagle Scouts and one who just couldn't deal with the COVID situation. But I've been active in the community. I love the community. In terms of other boards and such, I was just trying to remember, my husband and I dealt with the park. Hello, right? Park, Corey, and that was great. And we did what we needed to do and moved along. But all in all, I'm glad that I'm here. I'm glad that it appears that there are things that we're going to do that's exciting, and I am excited, and I am just ready to work, and that's about it.
Great, thank you, Sean. And then Lisa, I'm going to turn it over to you to take roll today.
Sure, thank you. So Alan Billingsley?
Yes.
Great. John Boatman?
Here too.
All right. Ed Brooks?
Here.
Ticomir Dunlap?
Here.
We heard from Jean Ehlers. Jesse Gamble?
Here.
Micah Glastetter?
I'm here.
Chair Melissa Jackson is present. Hank Jones?
I'm here.
Sean Martin?
Present.
Maya Neff?
I'm here.
Great. We have Jesse Black, and he is excused. And then we have Denise Nicole Franklin.
Present.
Chair, that's everybody.
Really so. Okay, the next thing we need to discuss is the minutes from our first 2 meetings. And since my Robert's rules are a little rusty, I'm wondering if I could ask maybe Courtney to lead that section for us.
Yes, so for the first meeting minutes, we have March 1st meeting, and you can do this either way, Chair. You can take them collectively or one at a time. And what you'll do is request a motion to approve the meeting minutes from March 1st and March 15th. Mm-hmm. Somebody will make that motion, and then we will ask if there is a second. Somebody will hopefully make that second, and then all in favor, all opposed, motion carries, assuming that the majority is in favor.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll move that we approve both meetings minutes together as written.
I'll second it.
So it was moved by Mr. Billingsley and seconded by Mr. Brooks that we approve both meeting minutes for March 1st and March 15th.
And so then all in favor, raise your hand. And you'll have to help me with that because I can't see everyone's hands raised.
I think we have a consensus, but we'll do all as well.
Great. Well, then the minutes stand approved. And next on our agenda, we have the code evaluation and tree canopy goals options. And I believe Alex and Chris will be leading us through that discussion.
Yes. Can you hear me? Okay, very good. Hi, everyone. Alex Hancock here. I am the urban forestry climate consultant with Planet Geo, and Chris Piper is on the call as well. I haven't seen him on here yet, but okay, there he is.
Yeah, hey, everyone. Director of Urban Forestry Consulting Services at Planet Geo, and assisting Alex with the code evaluation and developing scenarios and draft goals relating to tree canopy and tree planting and tree preservation. So Alex will be leading the presentation, and I'll weigh in and chime in as it relates to the canopy goals and question and comments that we have. So thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, so we're going to get started because we are covering a lot today. And this presentation will be a bit more interactive than our past presentations. So definitely want to prep everyone to be ready for some discussion and contribution. So just to go over our agenda today, we have we're going to go over our code review process, and then we'll discuss the results that we got from the city staff survey. Then we'll be going over community concerns and then recommendations to consider based on all of this information that we're going to go over. And finally, we'll go over some next steps. So first, we will look at our code review process. So why do we create policies and regulations for urban forests? Well, the reality is that many cities have had environmental regulations since their inception, and they protect natural resources that made these areas that we live in today so appealing and inhabitable in the first place. So with the expansion of human development over time, also came the creation of zoning and the rise of comprehensive plans. So today, these policies and plans and regulations help us to reach our goals, implement best management practices, and adhere to industry standards that promote public health and safety. For urban forests, we use these tools to address the spread of invasive species. We use them to protect threatened species, prepare for natural disasters, weather patterns, and a changing climate, and really so much more. So where do these policies and regulations live? In Washington state, a comprehensive plan is the primary regulatory document that guides local development practices, but you'll also find citywide goals and guiding principles in the comp plan, and these inform zoning ordinances. So zoning ordinances provide more technical guidance for development practices, and they inform how sites are developed and how land is managed. Environmental protection standards are often implemented at levels above the city, but there are city-specific ordinances that impact preservation of the land, ecological habitats, and even specific species. So many cities have policies and regulations that are specific to urban forests, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. You'll see that urban forestry related regulations in other plans and policies happen simultaneously at the city. So these other plans include stormwater plans, transportation efforts like complete streets plans, and parks management plans, for example. So we're going to be trying to stay pretty focused on the tree preservation ordinance today, but those things do overlap. So I want to share the timeline of our team's process for reviewing Lakewood's code And we'll go into more detail on the next slides, but we began the initial research and information gathering phase. And in this phase, we reviewed all of Lakewood's plans, policies, and regulations relating to urban forestry, and that so that we can understand the full context of the local policy here. Our phase for additional information gathering has been ongoing while we're getting feedback from city staff and all of you. So today we have plans to hear a lot more from you. And like I said before, we're going to be doing some more interactive exercises, so get ready for some live polls. Benchmarking research is our process for highlighting industry standards and comparing Lakewood with other cities in the area. And after today, we'll summarize all of our findings and compile a draft ordinance with recommendations based on all of these findings. So you'll be reviewing those recommendations next week and compiling your feedback into a report, and we'll then present the proposed ordinance, and hopefully City Council will adopt some or all of the recommendations. So now we're going to do a review of and summary of steps 1 and 2 and our processes there. So this is mostly what I covered on the last slide anyway, so I'm going to continue on to this one. In step 1, our goal is to review Lakewood's code using methods that are established throughout the industry. So this review process uses knowledge and standards established by national and international organizations like the International Society of Arboriculture, which is the organization that certifies arborists to practice. The U.S. Forest Service is another organization that we use their resources, American Forests, and even more that you see on the screen here. So we also specifically seek out local knowledge, especially city staff, for resources that reflect the local environment, because that really is so important when we're looking at how what resources are available to the local community and how these national and international standards really apply locally. So to put all of this into action, the U.S. Forest Service has created an audit system that helps cities to assess their programs and policies. We use this system as a framework to identify strengths in your local policies, areas for improvement, and opportunities for incorporating best management practices. So by identifying these gaps in policies early, it sets the stage for creating a plan for enhancing the code. It's important to note that sometimes having a policy isn't actually enough if the enforcement of that policy is ineffective, or if loopholes have been found that change the intent of the code. So it's important to keep in mind that even if the code is robust in having these, we have to make sure that procedures are intact for implementing the code. So to get us started with our interactive discussions today, we're using a website called Mentee.com. So let's see. Jonathan is going to be pulling up the Mentee slides, I believe. And just to give you, I can stop sharing if that's helpful. I think Jonathan will be pulling up the Mentee slides now. So just to give you a little bit of an overview, this poll will be anonymous. So your responses are anonymous, so you don't have to worry about judgment. There's no way of knowing who's responded with which answers. And we're going to start with, let's see. Oops. Sorry, okay, there we go. So yeah, we're going to start with an easy and fun question to make sure that everyone can use the tool first and gets set up. So if for some reason any of you aren't able to submit your answers here, we can send out a follow-up email or a list of questions to you, and you can submit them back that way. And yeah, so I will hand it over to Jonathan to get started.
Yeah, so you should have received a link via email a short while ago to access this. Does anyone have the code, or should I put it up on the banner?
Yeah, I don't see the link in any of my emails here. How long ago was it
Okay.
sent?
It's about 15 minutes ago, maybe.
I sent the email approximately at 4:11. Oh, no, sorry, it was 4:46. And I sent it with a high importance. It had the Mentimeter link, and if you click on that link, I think that you need a code based off of my experience. You should be able to access it.
I've got it. Yeah, it was just mixed in with all the
Perfect.
comment ones too.
Perfect. Yeah, it was the last one I sent this afternoon. So if you click on that, you will all be able to take the poll. And I believe, Jonathan, will we be able to see the live results on the screen?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so once you open that link, go ahead and we'll do this first question. As Alex mentioned, this is all anonymous. So as soon as we start seeing results come in, you all start making your selections. We'll start to see the live reaction.
And just to, I know you can all read it on the screen there, but the first question is just how many times is the word tree or trees mentioned in Lakewood's municipal code? So it's just a fun question to get everyone started and see how many times you think it's being mentioned in the code.
Jonathan, I can say that I did participate and it's showing a 0% on all of them.
Okay. Looks like Jesse.
Yeah, no, I'm having a similar experience, right? I tried to vote, I think, but it just displays the results.
Okay, let me stop sharing my screen to see if there's a setting problem.
It appears it wants us to sign up.
For this to be interactive, I think you do need to go to mentee.com and then put in this code. And then your results should be shown live here. We have one response.
There we go. Okay, this looks more familiar.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
I have about 12 committee members, so hopefully we'll get from 9 to 12 here.
And I will say one of those was my guess, just to try to get things going too.
I'm still not seeing where to put the code in.
So I think you need to open a new browser, type in www.mentee.com. And then when you get to the main page, there should be a place where you can add the code.
Well,
And then Jonathan, once they have this code pulled up on their screen, will they be able to access the next poll when we get to the next one?
Yeah, as long as I'm controlling it, it'll appear on your screen and move the presentation forward.
Okay. Okay.
well,
Lisa, should we just go ahead and move forward?
I'm in severe troubles here. I can't even find you guys anymore. Did you hear that by chance?
Yes. John, can you hear us?
Yes. I hear you, but I am not able to relocate you. Okay. I'm back on the Mentimeter.com, but that's about it.
Okay. Mentee.com. And were you able to put in the code?
No, I wasn't.
Do you have the browser open?
I had it, but okay, this is my shortfall. I'm going to go done. But then I can't recreate you all.
Do you have the second tab open maybe? Are we on a different tab for you?
Wrong. One thing is wrong. It's okay. Okay, the host has asked you. Okay, here we are. I'm back to you.
Okay, we see you.
Good.
Thank you.
Okay, I think I'll just go ahead and move us forward here. So thank you, Jonathan. And so basically the correct answer is 121 times. So this is the only question out of all of the questions we're going to have that has a correct answer. And it was 121. So that just gives you an idea of how many times that's discussed at some point anywhere in the code. And I'm going to reshare my screen again.
And just a quick reminder for everyone, go ahead and keep that mentee.com open with that code entered, because when the next question comes up, you'll be able to select as soon as we move to that slide.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, so like I said, 121 times it's mentioned in the code. So it just kind of gives you an idea, but it doesn't tell us a whole lot on its own. So what we do want to highlight is that for as many times as it's mentioned in the code, it's mentioned in different areas of the code. And that's pretty normal because you get different departments dealing with trees for different reasons. So just to highlight some of the main areas of Lakewood's code where tree is mentioned, we have the public works section of the code where they specifically refer to street trees. So this also gives you an idea of the structure of Lakewood's code, where you have title, and then when you focus in a little bit more, you get the chapter. So for the environmental protection title section of the code, then you have critical areas and natural resource lands authority, intent, and general provisions. So then we move on to title 18, and there's A, B, and C. So that's land use and development code, downtown development code, and the station district development code. And all of those are obviously having to do with development standards. So, I clicked on the link. Okay, not what I intended to do. Sorry, trying to go full screen on this again. Okay. There we go. So, so when we're going through this phase of the research, we always identify all the areas of the code that impact the city's urban forest. But for Lakewood, this committee has a very specific task that was given by City Council to focus on Title 18A, Chapter 70, Article 3. So this article is specific to tree preservation. And it's important to note that your recommendations and our recommendations as a group will likely impact other sections of the code and even the comprehensive plan as well. So we'll be sure to include all of those potential updates as a package in our final report. So now we are diving into the ordinance, and on this slide, I just want to read you what's currently identified as the purpose of the article. And while I'm reading, just keep in mind what you think might be missing here, and you can share those contributions with us afterwards. So this article promotes tree preservation by protecting the treed environment of the city of Lakewood by regulating the removal of significant trees and providing incentives to preserve trees that, because of their size, species, or location, provide special benefits. Tree preservation protects and enhances critical areas, facilitates aquifer recharge, reduces erosion and stormwater runoff, and helps to define public and private open spaces. So I think this is a wonderful purpose for this section of the code, but definitely want you to keep in mind and maybe even take notes on what you think is missing. So as for the next sections of the code within the tree preservation article, we look at tree removal applicability and exemptions, which basically means that this code doesn't apply to all zoning districts. It doesn't apply to all properties. It doesn't apply to all tree species, and it doesn't apply to all situations. So the code itself has identified what these exemptions are, and we've been tasked with identifying if these are correct exemptions, if anything needs to be addressed and revisited. So the next section is significant tree preservation. So this includes a definition of the word significant for a significant tree, and it includes standards for evaluation and preservation of those trees. Tree retention plan requirements. So these are a little bit more into the processes of how do city staff actually go through the process of reviewing plans that have significant trees as part of the plans, how they would permit any sort of removal or preservation, and then how during construction should trees be preserved. And then additionally, we go over the requirements for replacement of trees, tree removal, and tree trimming. And finally, there is a Tree City Fund section. And this, as you may expect, goes over funding sources and their purposes after they've been collected. So again, I just want you all to think about the components of that code section and what you think may be missing. So now we're going to go over the city staff survey results, because city staff are really some of the most important people to gather information from. They use the code every day. They interface with the public every day. So as a result, they have a really good idea of what's going on with this code section, what's working well, and where there are some issues. So the staff members we surveyed work in various departments. They work in parks, public works, planning, permitting, and code enforcement. So they look at trees from very different angles too. This is a summary of their comments. So obviously there's a lot on this slide, but you can see their comments in the middle section. We've organized their comments by code section, which is on the left-hand side. And then we've categorized them by whether by the type of change needed. So if it's just a clarification that's needed, it's a little bit of an easier change to the code, but it's something that's been identified that's unclear, that people either have a hard time understanding or a hard time explaining. And then changes needed. So this might actually be real content changes where maybe the intent is actually no longer the intent that the city wants to have for this requirement. And then other areas where it's working well. So there were a variety of comments, and just to highlight some of what's working well, they included the coordination between departments, the understanding of the tree code by staff. So staff understands the code pretty well. The review of commercial and multifamily development projects. So the tree protection standards during the review process of those projects goes pretty well according to staff. And then also the definitions of street trees and right-of-way trees and the regulations surrounding them. So also as part of the results, there were areas that need work. So you can see those on this slide. There's the tree replacement and mitigation section of the code, the exemptions section of the code that we previously discussed. They identified that we need clarification on some of the definitions, and one of those examples was sensitive areas versus critical areas, public education, fees and fines, and that some of those fines need to be reinforced because they're often reduced during the court process. So there's different ways that we can make recommendations to reinforce these parts of the code that are currently not working very well. So we're going to switch over to Jonathan again for a Mentee Poll, because we want you to take a look at these items and prioritize them yourself. So we want to know how you would prioritize these. And those options should come up for you when you pull up the poll. And again, these are anonymous, so you don't have to worry about judgment. I love watching these results come in because they're changing. The definitions are definitely important. Exemptions are an important piece of this code.
Could somebody share that Mentee code again? The Mentee code. Oh, there it is.
Yeah.
Do you have it ready, Jonathan?
I don't have it. Let me see. Show voting code.
I already have it open.
Oh, there we go.
They shared a code in the meeting.
It'll appear at the top there.
So the code, once you go to mentee.com, is 9673-0188.
Thank you.
Quick question about Mentee. Can people watching this on online that are not panelists use that code and get in and vote?
They can. The code will only be active for a short period of time. We will be putting out a poll that has similar questions and sending that out this week to the broader community. So.
So the options are just pick the highest priority, the first.
Right.
Okay. Jonathan, do we have, how many results do we have? Is that down in the bottom corner, 11?
Yeah, we have 11.
Okay. Okay. Well, I think we can go ahead and discuss this now. So, yeah, this is, I think, really telling. I think it helps to have you all take a look at things from the staff perspective too, because there's city staff deals with these issues all of the time. And so it's helpful to have you all prioritize this and understand that these issues are really difficult to prioritize, and that certain aspects of the code, like exemptions, they have a very big part of the code right now. So it is something that we want to be sensitive to and that we want to address. And tree replacement and mitigation is also something that we want to take into account. So this just helps us to take a look at things in a very functional way, because the way that we make decisions about which areas get the most priority has a pretty lasting impact on how development happens in the future and how tree protection standards happen in the future. So sometimes it comes down to very small details like what we're talking about right now. So, okay, thank you for that. And I will go ahead and share my screen again. Okay. Now we are going to move on to we want to highlight some of the community concerns that have come up. And first, just want to emphasize that the city of Lakewood has many responsibilities that span a variety of issues facing the city. So just to start off, the Growth Management Act of Washington sets goals for the city based on housing for all different income levels, office and employment space for new jobs, and it's all part of a regional growth strategy. So this is something that the city has to respond to and has a responsibility to fulfill for the city as well. We also have plans, policies, and initiatives in other various areas of the city, and that includes areas that offer parks and recreation, emergency services, transportation, stormwater, and other infrastructure. There are landscape and parking standards for new development, protection standards for critical areas and buffers for environmental features such as wetlands, fish and wildlife, flood zones and geological hazard areas, and critical aquifer recharge areas. And tree canopy and urban forest regulations really have to reflect all of these responsibilities while encompassing all of those national and international best practices that we've been talking about, and industry standards. So that just kind of sets the stage
Alex,
for, Yeah.
Before we leave that, I wanted to
Yeah.
chime in here. Just to give you a sense on the planning for housing and jobs. From 2008 to 2030, the city was given a growth target of about 9,300 new jobs and 8,300 new dwelling units. The city is getting a new allocation for the next 20 years that will go through 2044. And the city largely being built out, it's likely to be added on already developed sites or partially developed sites. So that's just to put in perspective, the city has to plan for that, show that it has the ability to accomplish that while it is also trying to meet Growth Management Act provisions for protection of critical areas. So just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. So here again, we've just recognized some of the overarching themes that have come up as community concerns. And it is hard to summarize them in such a big way, but what we've done, and again, you're going to be prioritizing these, so keep that in mind when you're looking at them, but economic development, jobs, and growth. Gary Oak protection is also an important piece of the community concerns. Affordable housing, increase to the tree canopy to promote environmental quality, such as air, water, habitat, and energy. And then we also have a priority of reducing the urban heat island effect by increasing tree canopy in underserved areas. So some of these have come up already in our past presentations, and some of them are new discussion points, but I went ahead and included the code here. So it's mentee.com 96730188. And while you're getting that pulled up, I will stop sharing and Jonathan's going to start sharing. And what we want you to do is just to prioritize those community concerns to you, because there's a lot of different ways that this can shake out. And
Hey, Alex, this is Chris. On my end, the audio cut out. Just want to make sure that I can hear you okay.
all right, can you hear me now?
Yes, we're good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, my Zoom actually shut down for a second there.
Looks like the poll is working, so we're in good shape there. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Like we have a full group, Alex.
What's that? I'm sorry.
I think everybody has participated.
Okay, very good. So yeah, it looks like it was very close for increase affordable housing and protect Gary Oak trees and habitat. And really, there's not a huge weight here as far as, I mean, we're seeing not a huge spread. So things are very close here. Protect Gary Oak and increase affordable housing is about twice what the increase economic development, jobs and growth is, but from 13 to 26%, we're seeing that it's tough to prioritize these. So what we'll do now is go into more detail on and some of the context for why some of these issues have continuously come up for the community. And then we will ask you to prioritize again those topics and see if things have changed for you. Okay. So, okay, so last meeting we discussed tree equity scores, and this week we want to highlight that this is directly related to temperature, and the heat island effect impacts communities disproportionately, because you see that on the left, it's a scale of kind of a pink color to red, red being the hotter temperatures. And you can see that those areas that are redder on the temperature map are also more orange on the tree equity score map, which means that those areas that are orange have less tree canopy, and they correlate with the areas on the temperature map for hotter temperatures. So it's just an important point to illustrate, because when we have hotter temperatures, people are more at risk to public health issues. And so it's important that we talk about climate and health and tree equity all encompassing. For Gary Oak protection, I'm sure most of you are very informed on this already, but just to highlight the importance, the state of Washington established that Oregon white oak woodlands are priority habitats for protection. So human development is a direct cause of oak removal, and conifer encroachment has been identified as a major threat. So these are things that we know that have been established by the state of Washington. And as a result, many jurisdictions, including Lakewood, have created specific measures in local codes that identify Oregon white oak woodlands as priority or critical habitats. And then they also include protection measures for this specific species as well. So, and Lisa, did you want to add anything else on this slide?
No, I think you've got it. Thanks.
Okay. So we did a review of some of the surrounding areas and their protection standards for Gary Oaks. And what I want you to pay attention to here is just the structure. So before we were looking at the structure of the title and chapter. And so we were able to pull information from Pierce County, Thurston County, Oak Harbor, and Tacoma. So you can see the variety of placement of these protection standards happen in the development regulations, which we discussed earlier a little bit, and then critical areas and environmental sections as well. So there's just a variety of places that you can locate and place these regulations. And Pierce County, for example, has them in two separate areas. So they have these regulations in the development area of the code, as well as the habitat conservation area of the code. And for Lakewood, currently there is an existing code to protect Oregon white oaks or Gary Oaks, and that is currently in the Land Use and Development Code. And it's a definition of the Gary Oak is included in the significant tree preservation. So when we're talking about important definitions, significant tree is one of those definitions that's important in the code. And we currently the city of Lakewood is protecting them when they're measured at minimum of 6 inches DBH, which is measured, its diameter at breast height, which is measured 4.5 feet off the ground. So that is part of the existing code, and something important to keep in mind if we're going to be modifying or enhancing that section of the code. That is the mention of Gary Oaks in the Land Use and Development Code. And we also identified that in order to be consistent with other codes where they have additional protection measures in the environmental section of the code, we identified chapter 14 as being a potential location for reinforcing these standards. And that would be in the critical areas and natural resource lands authority, intent and general provisions, and also the designation of critical fish and wildlife habitat areas. But it is important to note that this is not within the City Council's resolution that has been specified, but since it is a consistent theme with what we're talking about, we have called it out here and identified it. So one thing that we wanted to pull out and show as a potential strategy for Gary Oak protection was from the Oak Harbor Gary Oak tree protection standards. So in their code, Gary Oaks can be permitted for removal and trimming if certain criteria are met. And where feasible, the Gary Oak trees should be left as snags for their habitat value, which is that they are allowed to decompose. And then it establishes a critical root zone to protect the radius around a tree during building and construction. And this is definitely a best management practice that every code should have for trees in general, not just Gary Oaks. And incentives for Gary Oak preservation include a variance for setbacks, parking, or landscaping. So this piece is pretty important, the incentive, because it is a strategy that is found to be effective. When there is an incentive for developers, there's more likelihood to actually preserve a certain type of tree because they have an incentive to do so. So in this case, Oak Harbor has established variances that can be granted, so a setback from a property line, that they might be able to reduce a setback in order to protect a tree somewhere on the property. So we've seen that these work in other areas, and it's something really good to consider when talking about protection standards. So moving on to economic development, jobs, and growth. As mentioned before, there are goals for smart growth and economic development throughout the region. And as Lisa outlined, some of those Growth Management Act goals, there are also goals in Lakewood's comprehensive plan and throughout the Puget Sound Regional Council. So the funding, it's just important to note that funding is contingent upon meeting these goals. So it is something that's important as a citywide goal. And also important to note that economic development is not mutually exclusive from tree protection standards. So they can coincide. And I'm grouping this together with affordable housing right now because it is a different type of development that we need to account for. As the city of Lakewood is built out, you're restricted on where you're constricted on where you can actually develop. And so it turns into just infill development being the option. And it makes affordable housing a tough challenge. And so it is important to note that the city of Lakewood is now part of the South Sound Affordability Partners. And so this is a larger effort to increase affordable housing in the region. And it's important to note too that trees enhance the quality of life for everyone. So it's one of those investments that when you put it in the ground, it increases value of the tree itself, but also everything around it. So it's something that can really improve the environment. And tree preservation codes are an opportunity for innovative policies. And that's what we want to talk about next, is another incentive that was implemented in Portland, Oregon, FAR bonus. So that's floor area ratio. And that refers to the amount of floor area of a building in relation to the land area of the property that it's going on. So What Portland was able to pass into their code is a transfer of floor area ratio. So it's actually located in the multi-dwelling unit zoning district. And it acknowledges that if a development is going to be for affordable housing, there are FAR bonuses if certain trees are preserved. So it's tying together some really creative aspects that are all important issues to the city. And I think it's a really good example of how we shouldn't think of tree protection as restrictive, as it can be very creative and productive for a city as well. So now that we've gone through our discussion on these, we're going to revisit this and see what your thoughts are now on how you would prioritize these based on the information that you've just received, and see if things have changed at all. So I will have Jonathan start sharing again. And that Mentee code is 96730188. So the goal now is just to see if, based on the information provided, if anything has changed.
We're at 12.
Okay, so protected area oak trees and habitats are at the top with a heavier weighting this time of 36%. And then we have increased affordable housing at 28%, increased tree canopy for environmental quality at 15%, reduce the urban heat island effect at 11%, and increase economic development at 10%. So things did change a little bit this time. And we just want to be able to take all of this into account as we're considering which areas of the code to propose changes. So thank you. Okay, sharing my screen again. Okay, so now we are moving on to the recommendations to consider. So this is based on everything that we've gathered so far. Oh no, sorry about that. Okay. Based on all the information we've covered so far, we have some recommendations pulled together that we want to discuss with you. So yep, this is our opportunity to bring it all together. And just to keep in mind that when we're looking at changes to code language, typically it comes in a variety of methods, the top four being strengthen, clarify, modify, or create new. So when we strengthen with best management practices and industry standards, it makes for a stronger code in enforcing the intent of the code. Then when we clarify the existing language, it's really clarifying the intent. And modify existing language, it actually changes the intent. And then creating new code sections changes the structure of the existing code. So that structure that we went over in the first place, if we're creating new code sections, it'll actually change the whole structure of the code. So, and I can go over these, but Lisa, feel free to jump in at any time on these slides. There's a tree, we conducted a tree code comparison just to talk about some of the major areas of that we discussed in the previous slides. This one being to talk about tree canopy, urban tree canopy, tree equity scores, and how that relates to population and size of the cities. So we compared Lakewood, the city of Lacey, Olympia, and Renton. So here you can see that there's a range of urban tree canopy, existing urban tree canopy from 26% to 29.7%, and tree equity scores ranging from 69 to 83, and then populations ranging from 54,000 to 107,000, and then the square miles ranging from 17 to 23 and a half. And then it's also important just to note that regionally, the urban tree canopy goals range from a no net loss of existing canopy, which just means that when you remove a tree, you need to plant a tree. So it's just allowing for no net loss. And in theory, it means that you don't want to go down in canopy at all, percentage wise. So Lakewood with a no net loss would just be maintaining at 26% if it was a no net loss goal, or else the other goals in the region range from 30 to 40%. So those goals, you can see that we're right in the range of, we have room to improve here for Lakewood, and we're going to be going over some goals soon. So this slide goes over the parts of the code that deal with exemptions. So exemptions and replacements. So you can see comparing those same cities that Lacey, Olympia, and Renton, they also have restrictions in these areas, but Lacey, for instance, does not restrict by size, whereas Olympia and Renton do within single family lots. And then as far as the tree replacement ratios, I wanted to highlight that because there are different ways that we can implement different replacement ratios, and that has to do with either number of trees or size of trees for each tree removed. So there's different ways that we can explore these types of recommendations.
And Alex, I think Courtney has her hand raised.
Okay, yeah.
Alex, I just thought that this was really good information, and I was wondering if you wouldn't mind giving the example of what, for example, Lacey means here. So when you're saying just walk us through an example in code terms, comparing Lakewood has exemptions under 17,000 square feet, no exemptions over 17,000 square feet. There's out for critical areas, industrial zones are subject to SEPA. And so if they were in a critical area or even outside of a critical area, new industrial development would be subject to SEPA, which would require tree preservation, and then our ratio. Would you mind explaining that for Lacey and Olympia and Renton? I might be the only one confused, but I just want to make sure the whole committee understands.
Sure. And Lisa, if you want to go into detail on this slide.
Sure. We're obviously trying to summarize pretty complex code in a chart. But generally the other cities, including Lacey, will say you can remove a certain number of trees in a certain period of time. And they don't necessarily restrict by the size of the parcel or have a different amount necessarily by parcel. And they don't necessarily distinguish the partial exemption for removing some trees, whether it's residential or commercial. So that's just what that means, Courtney, if that makes sense.
Okay, so in Lacey, any individual would be able to go in and remove a certain number of trees per year.
Right, up to a certain number over a period of time. Similar
and in
to
Olympia, if they're under 2 acres, then they're able to do tree removal.
Right. So the way that Lacey looks at it, for example, on residential, it's not by lot size. They'll say you are allowed to, if you have a development permit, you're allowed to remove trees within that footprint plus 10 feet. If you don't have a development permit, you can remove a certain number of trees over a 3-year period. So anyway, that's what those 3 words mean.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think it is helpful to talk through some of these because it does get pretty complex pretty quickly, and there's so many different ways that we could structure it. So thank you for that, Lisa. So taking that into mind and also taking into account everything that we covered in the last presentation, we identified canopy goal scenarios. So whereas the previous slide was really talking about protection standards for individual trees and replacement ratios based on tree removals of individual trees. Now we're zooming out to canopy goal scenarios. And based on the findings that the city of Lakewood has 26% canopy, we identified as canopy goal scenario 1 that if you were to achieve an ambitious 40% in 25 years, it would be a 14% increase. And we've identified how that would look over the course of 25 years. And we recognize that it may feel ambitious to be talking about this, but it helps to identify what it actually takes to get there. And it's important to also identify that this is not, it can't be just city and public land. It needs to be also community-wide, because that's so much of the land that has the potential to grow canopy is private property. So there have to be incentives to grow that canopy over time in order to reach these goals. And so in this goal scenario, it would require 1,500 acres of new canopy. And it's also important to note that when a tree grows over time, it's adding canopy. So any tree that is preserved will add canopy over time. And this does not necessarily mean that trees won't be removed. I mean, this is with the understanding that trees will be removed and that they need to be replaced. So we're happy to talk more about this, but also just want to identify scenario 2 that identifies a 35% canopy goal for 25 years. So again, this is projecting out into the year 2047. This would be a 9% increase in canopy and 975 additional acres of canopy. So it's worth saying that we did explore 30% and 35 as canopy goal scenario 2, but we do think that it's important to set goals that are ambitious, and it just makes sense. Even if you don't achieve the goals, you're still striving for this great number, and it's important. So we're happy to talk through this more. And Chris, if there's anything that you want to add on either of these slides or on the next slides, just feel free to chime in.
Yeah, okay. Just a few things here. The 25 years is a example horizon for how we spread out this canopy goal and the incremental milestones and intermediate canopy goals. So it doesn't have to be 25 years. It aligns with what we see other cities doing in terms of setting canopy goals, but it can align with others. And of course, if you spread that out over a longer period, it's less trees per year, less acres of canopy per year required. Just a couple other notes that the added ecosystem benefits are greatly underestimated. It doesn't include property value, structural asset or structural value of trees, the human health and well-being aspects. It's primarily ecosystem benefit related. air quality, energy savings, stormwater reduction, that sort of thing. A couple other things to mention, but those are some key points that I wanted to make. Yes, go ahead.
Alan has his hand up.
Yes.
Well, I just have a quick question. With the canopy growth is really a very dynamic thing to try and calculate. Trees have a natural life cycle. For instance, we've taken trees out in the park that were poplars that had just simply reached their life cycle. And of course, like you say, the trees are always growing. Have we taken into consideration normal life cycle when you look at the makeup of the canopy, as well as just cutting trees down and planting new ones?
Yes, to a degree, we add a mortality rate to the existing estimated citywide urban forest, as well as a mortality rate to trees being planted that are city-led and community-led. So that's factored into the acres of canopy required. We don't get down to a real granular scale of making estimates on incremental growth in canopy of existing trees, but we do factor it in to a degree. One thing that we do recommend, you'll see going forward when we have draft recommendations, is to continually reevaluate and reassess tree canopy cover. And technology allows us to be a lot more affordable to do this, every year, even 2 years, and it can get down to the sub-meter accuracy, 60 centimeters. So that's just something that you'll see in recommendations going forward.
Looks like Ed has a question.
Yeah, I guess my question as it relates to this, but also as it relates to the growth, city growth, planned growth, and we talked about population numbers and all these other things. Is there any correlation between that? Because quite frankly, to put the housing numbers that we talked about earlier with the city goals is going to require something to go away. So, and that is trees. So I'm just curious if you compensated for that in these two goal setting scenarios.
Right. I will say we started from the ground up with establishing these 40%, 35, and 30% by looking at the available planting space by zoning type. So we understand that each zoning type, residential, commercial, industrial, has a different level of existing canopy and also the available space for new trees. So the plantable space, we applied a planting target to. I don't recall the numbers offhand, but let's say there's 40% of industrial land area is potentially plantable. We apply a target of planting only 5% of that. So to a degree that addresses the question you asked, but also when we go forward with making recommendations to policy, we're going to have to look at, what are the landscaping and design standards for trees? What are the mitigation requirements for replanting to make sure that we compensate for loss, but also consider the available space for trees. We don't want to just throw trees in the ground to meet the criteria to say that we're increasing canopy. It has to be the right tree, enough space for the tree, post-planting care. A lot of factors go into this. So we'll provide recommendations on strategies to go forward with that, but a lot to consider. A couple hands here. Denise?
Thank you, Chris. Sorry, there's a word echo, but just to go, you kind of answered it in the tail end of responding to Ed's question. I'm excited about what you just said because affordable housing is my jam, and just wrapping in the model of Portland's approach for the fair bonus incentive for trees and affordable housing, but really it's that education for the new owners, the new homeowners that are getting into affordable housing, and how do they care for the trees that are being planted, and embracing that incentive that they're receiving for not only caring for their new home, but that lifestyle of that tree, and just learning about the urban tree canopies that they're now responsible for. It's a new thing, but I didn't see it wrapped into that scenario. So I'm excited once we get to that recommendation part. But there was another key part that you mentioned at the very tail end of that. Is that something, as we're going through this process, that we potentially can create our own Lakewood model similar to Portland's bonus and incentive plan?
As far as the incentives for preserving trees as it relates to maybe a stormwater utility, or could you expand on that?
So what my question is an incentive model that is wrapped, because as we're going through and we were doing that poll, every time that our scale, the priority is going to change as we're learning more. Because as we got to the scenario type, by the time we got there, my priorities have already changed again, because it's like it all comes together even further. So what I was hoping to get to, would we be able to create a model where we're able to recommend to the city council a model that wraps in the affordable housing plus an education piece for somebody to say, this is the approach. This is how you care for these trees that are being planted, because we don't want to just put up trees that are not going to be cared for. If you've never had a tree or a garden, we don't want the trees to die. Who's going to care for them, you know? So that was my question.
Chris, I can maybe weigh in a little on that.
Sure. Yep.
Sure.
So our focus is on Article 3, the tree protection regulations, but part of our scope was to look at what are the implications of those changes on the city's comprehensive plan, such as establishing a canopy goal in the first place, or what are the potential connectors to other parts of the code. So I think if the committee comes up with relationships like, in order to preserve, give a little on setbacks or on floor area or things like that, those recommendations can go forward. Our focus is on the tree protection code, but it is related to other things.
Thank you.
And just to echo that, I would like to be able to draft those recommendations, and where we draft them, we might not know exactly where it's going to land, but just letting the elected officials know what the priorities are and what it could look like, I think is beneficial. And then there may be future decisions that are up to the legal department and other departments, but I think it's definitely absolutely worth us drafting it up. So I see we have more questions. Tikomar?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I just want to point out that in terms of mitigation, like not all trees necessarily have the same amount of value. So like a Gary oak is going to take a lot longer to grow than other tree species. So if you just do mitigation by planting trees of smaller diameters, that's not necessarily going to replace the value of the Gary oak tree, because they take a very long time to grow. So you're not going to get that same value of the tree within a short amount of time. So I just wanted to point that out.
Right. Yeah, thanks for that. And in this process of reviewing, we'll look at potential frameworks and language that looks at, making sure that all considerations are made for perhaps a hardscape conflict, that there are amendments made to the tree itself, potential root pruning, and then alternative solutions to hardscape before approving the removal and then allowing mitigation plantings, because of the fact that you said, it'll take a long time for those benefits to recover. There are also potential frameworks on how you address authorized removals versus unauthorized removals on street and private trees. And so an unauthorized removal may be the full value as assessed by the landscape appraisers for that tree removed. Again, you don't get the canopy back, but you have funding for potentially the program and more planting and more efforts for solutions to preserve trees going forward. So we're going to look at some options there.
It's like Jesse, and then maybe after this question, Chris, we should finish out the slides because we're pretty close.
Sounds good.
I'll make it quick. I really appreciated the comments from Ed and Denise about looking at affordable housing with this, and I appreciate the city staff and Lakewood bringing forth some of those recommendations as well, especially with the PSRC goals. I think a lot of jurisdictions tend to look at their lengthy goals in a vacuum, where they'll have, this is our tree goal, this is our affordable housing, and I think the more we can try to integrate the two of them, even if we do see overlap that might compete or contend, that we at least acknowledge that there's multiple competing goals, I think would be excellent. And might be a bit early, but federal way tree code, especially as it pertains to replanting maybe some disease or damaged trees, or even just replanting in general to ensure the health of a tree would be maybe something good to encompass here. So thank you.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for your comment. I just wanted to mention, like, the Arbor Day Foundation is exploring integrating canopy data into websites like Zillow and others for like relating to the property itself. So trees become a factor of on these websites. And I think education and outreach specific to Lakewood is essential, and aligning with other goals and efforts. So yeah, thanks for that comment.
Yeah, thank you. I love all this discussion. It's exactly what we're hoping to generate. So, all right, I will get through these pretty quickly and see if we can take a couple more comments at the end. So also included in the recommendations to consider is just outlining the impact of a 40% urban tree canopy goal, because we wanted to highlight the areas that would be impacted most by these if we were to be setting these priority planting goals and the impacts that they would have. So by raising all community block groups, CBGs, community block groups, to a tree equity score of 75 would impact these areas. So this is the first one that we're looking at on the left, is raising these areas to a tree equity score of 25. And then for the second map, we're looking at the community block groups that have less than 25% urban tree canopy. So you can see how they relate to the tree equity score. And then the third is showing those community block groups that have an average temperature of higher than 85. So, so these, you can see that they're all very much related, and having priorities around our planting goals has a large impact on the areas that need it most. And here we're looking at the first map is the potential planting area, and that these community block groups have more than 50% potential planting area. And you can see that this one doesn't necessarily line up with where our need is for additional canopy. So it's just something to highlight that we do need to pay attention to how we're getting new urban tree canopy and where we can put it. So our second map here is those community block groups that have greater than 50% people of color. And you can see based on our previous maps that those are the underserved areas as well when it comes to tree canopy, and also the higher temperatures where the urban heat island effect is. And then the low employment community block groups also have a correlation with the low tree canopy areas. And so this map here just identifies for our 40% urban tree canopy goal, the areas combined that have the low tree equity score, low urban tree canopy, high temperature, high potential planting area, high people of color, and low employment. So this identifies some of those areas that we would strategize to prioritize. And anything else that you want to add on this, Chris? Nope.
Just that this is an example composite of overlaying those different priorities. And then this is again from the bird's eye view, large scale. You get down to the ground, you're going to see limitations and other opportunities. And it's important to look at specific parcels, land use, to identify those opportunities and challenges. So we can only do so much with GIS and data, and it'll take people on the ground to really make this work.
So Alex, we have about 4 more minutes. So I think if we can get through this last piece of information and the poll and the questions, that would be great.
Okay. So this chart, basically it identifies the canopy change that we also ran and what the existing canopy is for the different zoning districts. So this is all organized by zoning district. And you can see that the canopy change here, it most impacted the right-of-way and as a negative canopy change. And the military areas actually had the highest positive change of canopy. So this model just helps to understand where these canopy changes have happened and where the canopy acres are needed in order to meet these goals. And just wanted to note quickly that these numbers were run based on the 2019 data that was available, but Lakewood is receiving the 2021 data as well. It does come out this month or next month. It's very soon. So because you had done this purchase at this time, you are getting the 2021 data as well. We just don't have it yet. And we'll go ahead and jump into the poll now. We want you now to be able to prioritize these recommendations as we've kind of brought everything together, identified the different topics, and brought together everything as recommendations to consider. So we have Mentee.com 96730188, and you should be able to start answering the question now. And Jonathan should be pulling it up.
Looks like we have our full crew, Alex.
Okay, great. So yes, we will be taking all of this into account as we're looking at making our recommendations. But incentives for tree preservation did rise to the top, and the canopy goals, which also takes into account priority areas as well. So, so I won't spend too much time discussing because we do have to get back, we have to wrap up here. So. Okay, and just want to highlight our next steps. So drafting the ordinance changes with canopy goals. Okay, can you all hear me? I just got a
yes, yeah.
Okay. With canopy goals and identifying other code sections and the comprehensive plan updates for consistency. And then we'll be seeing you again next week for the Tree Advisory Board Committee meeting number 4 to discuss these code evaluations.
Thanks, Alex.
Yes. So, and that's what I have. And we're at 9:30, or I'm sorry, it was 6:30 on the dot. So thank you so much, everyone, for all of your participation. This was really informative and really beneficial for the process. I think hearing from all of you is just, it helps us so much with formulating these goals.
So, Alex, I think it's fair to say that along with the recommendations from the team, we will be giving a framework outline for the committee report that ultimately it'll be blank, but it'll be outlined basically on the major topic areas. And so there'll be a lot more discussion at the next couple, 2 to 3 meetings of the tree committee. Courtney, did you have it, or the chair or Courtney, anything else?
I will turn it back over to the chair. Thanks, Lisa.
Okay, I would highly encourage everyone, if you have a few minutes, to read through those letters that we received from our friends and neighbors in the community. They have some very strong opinions and ideas about what they want to see our committee do for our community. So if you get a chance, read through. Is there any other questions, announcements, or any other comments?
Is public comment just coming in via email currently? Is that how we're getting these?
Yes. That was something I wanted to put forward as well. I'm wondering if that is the best idea, if maybe we should, or could we open it back up for some public comment so we can hear from our neighbors?
I wouldn't encourage that personally, because it's already taken a while to get through this information. We got some critical stuff to go through, and I think if somebody has a strong stance and wants to make a statement, then an email is a great way to do it, and we get it and can read it at our leisure.
Okay. Okay. Well, is there any other comments anyone would like to make? If not, I guess move to adjourn the meeting. And thank you very much.
All right, thanks everyone. Have a great evening.